Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you've ever been to a Western wedding, there is a very good chance you've heard the phrase we're going to be looking at today. It's practically unavoidable. But as we unpack the historical data, the cultural context, and some really fascinating linguistic connections, we're going to discover that what we assume this ancient phrase means and what it actually meant to its original audience, yeah, they are two completely different things. It's like a giant puzzle, so let's uncover these layers together.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It states, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." It is an incredibly famous verse. It's constantly quoted at weddings, in marital counseling. You even hear it in pop culture all the time. But familiarity can sometimes be the enemy of true understanding, right? We hear these words so often that we just kind of assume we know exactly what they're instructing us to do.
In modern Western culture, this whole leave and cleave concept is almost universally interpreted as an instruction to, well, disregard your parents, like a literal leaving of your family behind to focus solely on your new spouse. But historically, no way. This text was actually never meant to be a command to abandon your family. Rather, as we'll see, it was establishing a revolutionary moral boundary against incest. To really grasp this, we have to travel back in time a bit.
Section 1. The ancient cultural context. Beyond modern assumptions.
Now, what's really interesting to realize here is something that might seem shocking to our modern sensibilities. In the ancient world, incestuous relationships were a very common reality. It was totally standard practice for relatives to marry just to keep property within the family, or to continue the family name. In fact, historical texts show us it was often considered the absolute duty of a brother to take his deceased sibling's wife as his own, just to ensure that sibling's name continued. And even today, marrying exclusively within close relative circles remains common in certain Eastern cultures. So think about it. The original audience wasn't dealing with overbearing in-laws. They were dealing with deeply entrenched, incredibly insular marital practices.
So against that gritty historical backdrop, we discover what this ancient text was actually doing. It was a real game changer. God was establishing the very first moral norms and boundaries for marriage. The command to leave father and mother was specifically forbidding father-to-daughter and mother-to-son relationships. It was a divine mandate that children actually have to leave their immediate nuclear family unit to go find an outside spouse. It wasn't about emotional abandonment at all. It was literally about preventing incest. And these foundational relationship guidelines, introduced here in Genesis, they're expanded upon and strictly clarified later on in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18.
Section 2. Decoding one flesh. More than just romance.
So that brings us to the second half of that famous verse. What does one flesh actually mean? In our highly romanticized modern era, we tend to reduce this phrase to merely mean physical intimacy or maybe emotional closeness. But is that all this ancient phrasing was trying to convey?
So the crucial point is this. According to the source material, one flesh is profoundly about children. A child is the literal, physical, and spiritual representation of the parent's love and oneness. And this goes so much deeper than simple biology. The text points out that animals have offspring through the mere process of mating, pure physical proximity. But for humans, this concept of one flesh completely elevates the union. It's not just a physical act, it's a deep spiritual oneness that results in the creation of new life.
And this spiritual depth is so profound that the Apostle Paul actually revisits it centuries later. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul paraphrases this exact statement from Genesis to explain how husbands should treat their wives. And there's a really fascinating linguistic detail here. Paul uses what we call garden language. He reflects back to Genesis, where God instructs Adam to tend the Garden of Eden. And in the original Hebrew text, the garden is represented in a feminine form. So Paul is drawing this beautiful, poetic parallel between Adam carefully and lovingly tending to the garden and a husband tending to his marriage.
Section 3. Charity begins at home, the ultimate meaning.
And this brilliantly illustrates the global, enduring impact of this ancient text. When you start looking at different linguistic traditions, this really beautiful picture emerges. For instance, take the Tamil language. The Tamil word for wedding literally translates to a pleasing aroma. I just love how poetic that is. A wedding is not just a legal contract. Linguistically, it is described as a sweet, pleasing aroma ascending to God. When the concept of holy matrimony is approached with this kind of reverence, it elevates the entire institution.
Furthermore, the Tamil word for the ongoing lived-in state of marriage is always associated with the concept of charity. So, in this rich linguistic tradition, marriage is inherently an act of charity.
It literally proves the old adage that charity truly begins at home. It's within the walls of our homes, with our spouses and our children, that we first learn to give of ourselves completely.
And that's absolutely crucial, because charity is the ultimate path that leads to God. The Apostle Paul writes so beautifully about this in 1 Corinthians 13. He says, "Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. Whether there be prophecies, they shall fail, but charity endures." This right here, this is the absolute gold standard for the home.
Let's move to see how all this builds to our ultimate conclusion. Leave and Cleave isn't about abandoning your parents. It was a revolutionary moral code that protected the family unit from the start. And when that family unit is operating correctly, as a living act of charity, demonstrated through deep love for a spouse and providing wisdom to the children who represent that one flesh, something miraculous happens. A marriage completely covered in love and worship actually transforms the physical home into a temple where God resides.
Which leaves us with this final, profound question to reflect upon today. Is your marriage a living act of charity? And is your home a temple? By peeling back the layers of a seemingly simple phrase like leave and cleave, we move from a misunderstood rule about in-laws to a beautiful, ancient blueprint for a sacred, charitable home. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this text. I really hope it leaves you with a fresh perspective and a desire to explore the deep roots of the words we use every single day.